Thank you, Thomas, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I want to make the case, I'll go back here a minute. I'm going to make the case that post-industrial cities are in a great position to take advantage of the new maker economy. And this is based on, this is based on the book that I've just published called Remaking Post-Industrial Cities, Lessons from North America and Europe. So I have European examples as well. I studied 10 cities in the US and Europe. The cities in the US, Pittsburgh, Buffalo, Milwaukee, Detroit, and New Orleans. And in Europe, as you can see, Bilbao, Torino, Ruhr Valley, Rotterdam, and Liverpool. In 2011, Jeremy Rifkin, you might have read this book, The Third Industrial Revolution, predicted there would be a third industrial. In fact, we were in the middle of it in his mind. The first industrial revolution was in the 17th and 18th century with steam power and mechanization. The second industrial revolution was electrification and mass production. The third industrial revolution that he claims is based on internet technology, renewable energy, and the digitization of technology and manufacturing. In fact, he further asserts that additive manufacturing will be one of the key drivers in the third revolution. And how will this third industrial revolution affect the urban economy? Economic impacts of additive manufacturing. Maybe somebody's already spoken about this, but it's clear the democratization of manufacturing. You've heard about the small prototyping that goes on, but it allows small and medium-sized companies to compete with big companies wherever they are in the world. You make things where they are, so you save on logistics, you save on energy, you save on marketing. But what about the impact on cities? Cities have always been the forefront of entrepreneurship and innovation. It's where innovation and entrepreneurship really takes place. But not all the cities are going to benefit equally from this third industrial revolution. Who will win and who will lose in this race? We need to look no further than to Richard Florida's book, The Rise of the Creative Class. How many of you read that book or heard of it? It's a very important book. He postulates that the cities that will gain in the future are the cities that will have creative people in them, especially young creative people who are risk takers, people who are mobile. And they're going to gravitate to cities that have that kind of culture. He identified 4 T's for creative cities, cities that attract people. In the United States, that would be, say, like Austin, Texas. In Europe, it could be Barcelona, of course. What are those 4 T's? Technology. Technology is a measure of innovation. You can measure innovation by the number of patents that have been applied for and gotten in a particular region. It's also the presence, and this is very important, of research universities and medical centers. And lastly, corporations that are actually doing research. So if technology exists in the town, you have a leg up. What's talent? Talent is the density of people with professional degrees and skilled crafts. Both the breadth and depth of that kind of... Silicon Valley is the perfect example of a place with density of employment. If you lose your job over here at Google, you just change your parking space and you work for Facebook over there. That's the kind of economy that will drive the new economy. Tolerance, now this is very important. In the age of immigration, in the age of class warfare that we're seeing even in our own domestic economies, diversity should be celebrated, embraced, and that's race, class, sexual orientation, age, whatever it might be. And then the last one is very close to me, which is territorial assets. Creative people like to live in places like Barcelona, places that have entertainment, outdoor recreation, lots of things happening day and night. They will go to those cities, and the cities that don't have those attractions will be less attractive to the creative class. And so let's go back to my book and discuss why post-industrial cities may have an advantage in this third industrial revolution of the maker economy. The book itself grew out of the Remaking Cities Congress in Pittsburgh in 2013. and I was the co-chair of that. Prince Charles was the honorary chair, and we had delegates came from both sides of the Atlantic, from Europe and the United States, dealing with that one particular issue. Post-industrial cities like Pittsburgh, like Torino, like Birmingham, England, how are they coming back? Have they come back since the 1980s when it all collapsed? Each delegate was assigned to one of 5 workshops. In those workshops, a case study was presented from Europe and one from the United States. So altogether, 10 case studies were presented. A few months after the Congress, I was approached by publishers. I'd never written a book in my life. They wanted to document those case studies. They felt it was that important that we do it. So I signed a book contract, and off I went. Now, post-industrial. That's actually a fairly new term. It first occurred in 1973 by American sociologist Daniel Bell when he produced a book called The Coming of Post-Industrial Society. He was way ahead of his time. He predicted in 1973 that there would be a shift in the Western democracies from manufacturing-based economies to service-based economies. In 1973, not one of the 10 cities in my book was in decline. They were actually booming. He correctly forecasted that shift, and we see it today. We're much more service-based economy than manufacturing. What he did not anticipate was what would happen to the Western democracies in the US and Europe. Jobs and industries went to Asia, and what was left behind were empty factories, unemployment, and social ills. 10 years after the publication of my book, in the 1980s, the bottom fell out of most of the industrial cities in the Western world. Akron, Ohio was known as the rubber capital of the world. They lost 35,000 jobs in about 3 years when Firestone, Goodyear, Goodrich, and General all closed. In Glasgow, Scotland, the giant shipbuilding cranes were idled. In Torino, in 1980, 23,000 jobs were lost in the great Fiat Motor Works. And in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, 30,000 steelmaking jobs were lost in the space of a few years. And so we got pejorative names for post-industrial cities, shrinking cities, and particularly in the United States, the term Rust Belt cities. Pittsburgh is known as a Rust Belt city, and as are many others. In Pittsburgh in the 1980s, it became very clear that manufacturing was going away and fading fast. We lost 133,000 high-paying industrial jobs in steel, aluminum, and glass in the space of 8 years. Unemployment reached over 20%, which was comparable to the Depression in the 30s, 50 years earlier. Families left the region, took their jobs, they went for better prospects, and I guess warmer climates. They ended up in the South and the Southwest. We saw increased rates of suicides, family dysfunctions, addiction, all indications of psychological depression. Gloom and despair prevailed, and I was living there. That's my hometown. However, in 1985, the community leaders, business leaders, governmental leaders came up with a strategic plan for the next 30 years. They focused on 4 high-profile projects that they must have if they were going to join the new economy. One was to have an international airport terminal. Secondly, there was a big competition in the United States to get the Software Engineering Institute. It was funded by the federal government. It was only going to go to one city. They went after it. They got that. And on the lower left, you see those big black computers. There were 5 supercomputers that were built in the United States in the 1980s. Pittsburgh got one. And the 4th one under the Christmas tree was the National Robotics Engineering Center. By the 1990s, Pittsburgh had all 4 of those in place. And so Pittsburgh transformed itself from a smoky city. At one time, we had 32 steel mills along our three rivers, to what you see today, which is a city of knowledge, technology, and universities. It was the great American comeback, as you can see in this graph. 1970 to 2015, employment is tracked in this graph. You can see in red what happened in the 1980s. Down it went, 133,000 jobs. But the key from that point on, look at the graph, continues to go up, was economic diversity. Today, less than 10% of the jobs in Pittsburgh are manufacturing. The 10% that in 1970, it was about 20%. And the 10% that's left is in high-value manufacturing, end product manufacturing, and in fact, beginning to have 3D additive manufacturing in Pittsburgh. And the engines for that transformation are right here in the Oakland neighborhood of Pittsburgh. In the foreground, you see Carnegie Mellon University, my alma mater, and where I teach now. In the middle ground, you see the University of Pittsburgh and 5 research hospitals of the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. And in the background, just a few miles away, is downtown Pittsburgh. Today, Pittsburgh indeed has become a diverse economy. You can see we still have legacy companies like US Steel, Alcoa, Heinz, and PPG. Their headquarters and their research facilities are in Pittsburgh. Their manufacturing might be in Mexico or Poland or some other place, but we have the brain power staying there. But, for instance, the new companies, Google, Uber, Apple, Intel, I could add Disney, I could add a bunch of others. Google has the third largest grouping of Google employees in the world is in Pittsburgh. Silicon Valley, number 1, New York City, number 2, Pittsburgh, number 3. Uber has just located their major research facility for autonomous vehicles in Pittsburgh because we have the Robotics Institute there. And we're not sitting on our laurels. We've now created a new research center called the Next Manufacturing Center, which this is all about right here, in terms of 3D printing and additive manufacturing. And we're collaborating with local companies to create a cluster of people who actually do this manufacturing, whether it's prototyping or mass production. And building on the presence of a raw material that everybody knows who does direct metal prototyping, which is powder metal. We have the 3 largest powder metal manufacturers in the United States in southwestern Pennsylvania, in Pittsburgh. And just last week, as I was coming across the Atlantic, Shell Oil Company announced they were going to build a €6 billion ethane cracker plant right next to Pittsburgh that will convert shale gas to polyethylene, as we know, a raw material for what? Additive manufacturing. So Pittsburgh is being poised for that kind of thing. So let's return to those 10 cities in the book. I won't name them again. You can see where they are. They have strengths. Post-industrial cities have strengths. Historic neighborhoods and downtowns. You can see that in Pittsburgh. You can see that in Torino. You can see that in Liverpool. Universities and medical centers. I've emphasized that again, over and over again. Parks and cultural amenities, vacant land and adaptable buildings. And you can see many manufacturing buildings being turned into innovation centers in every one of these towns. Resilience and talent of the people, and abundant fresh water. So I'll conclude with some lessons learned from these post-industrial cities. 7, I have many, but I'll just stay with 7. First of all, and it's not surprising, diversify the economy is the most important thing. For the last 30 years, these 10 cities have been replacing jobs in basic manufacturing with jobs in technology, tourism, recreation, health, finance. And we saw that happen in Pittsburgh. But even Detroit, which is kind of the poster child for post-industrial decline, it's coming back. Sure, you can see there's a closed General Motors plant up there on the left, but Quicken Loans, which is a big financial organization in the United States, has 10,000 employees in the Detroit region. They moved them all to a new building downtown. They're investing in downtown. And at the very bottom is this little startup company called Shinola Watch Company. 4 years ago, there were 20 people working for Shinola. Today, there are 400 people. And there's an influx of young people moving to Detroit or in Detroit are saying, we're not giving up on Detroit. Be bold and take risks. No, we'll go back here a second. I'm sorry. I was ahead of myself. Okay. Another example here in Torino is Inchet, which is a closed factory for 30 years. It's now being turned into something called Ex-Inchet that locates entrepreneurial, university buildings, housing. It's a complete complex. And there's a key ingredient in there called Open Inchet, in which they're bringing people in, startup companies, to collaborate in a collaborative space and make that into a kind of entrepreneurial space. So be bold, take risks. Cities often have to, when they're in distress, they reach out to say, let's attract Xerox to our town. Let's build a new stadium for soccer, football. Let's have the World Fair come to our city. Now that could work if it was part of a strategy for how that big move actually plays into a larger, but it doesn't work if that's the only thing. And just compare the 1992 Summer Olympics right here in Barcelona. It's the case study of leveraging something to big time. What happened in Barcelona after that? You've lived through it. Those from Spain, you know what it's like. The revitalization of Barcelona, you can reach right back to the Olympics. Now let's look at the 2014 Winter Olympics in Sochi, in Russia. It's 2 years later. Sochi is a ghost town. I've seen that written many times. So being bold and taking risks makes a lot of sense. And so the most famous example of the silver bullet, of the taking the risk, of course, is right here in Spain, the Guggenheim Museum in 1997 by Frank Gehry. Leadership is important, as we've seen in Pittsburgh in 1985. But again, looking back at Torino, maybe you know this story. Valentino Castellani was a college professor, elected the first mayor of the city in 1993. He did 2 master plans for the city in 95 and 97. It led to getting the Winter Olympics in 2006, and it led to the revitalization of the central city. If you've seen Spina Centrale, you know what that amounts to. If we go to the Ruhr region in Germany, here's Dr. Karl Ganser. In 10 years, 1989 to 1999, he created the Emscher Landscape Park. 100 preservation projects of old, rotting coal tipples, steel factories, created €3 billion park that wove through the whole region. And not only did it become a recreational resource, it raised the self-image of people from the Ruhr, because people in Germany and Italy saw it as just a dying, rusting hulk of a place. And the repurposed buildings, as you can see in these slides, either they're backdrops for parks or even arts and cultural activities. Strengthen the central city. We certainly did that in Pittsburgh. The emptying out of the central city was a consequence of these factories closing. As people left, jobs left. It became clear in all these cities that something had to be done. A good example of this is in Rotterdam, where they built this market hall. 2014, 102,000 square meter building. It has 228 apartments, a food market, fresh food stalls, 100 of those, a supermarket, and a wonderful open space. In Market Square in Pittsburgh on the left, this is just a few years old. This was a park that was poorly maintained and known for drugs and violence. And now we've turned it into a European piazza, and thousands of people are there every day. On the right-hand side is an example of infill housing for affordable housing for housing in the central city. Invest in culture, heritage, and quality of life. It must accompany the kind of economic revival. And we go back to Richard Florida. If we want to retain and attract young workers and creative people into our city, we better be able to deliver on quality of life and celebration of our heritage. And cities that have abandoned brownfield sites or railroad lines or factories, they have begun to redo these and repurpose these things. In fact, they become, as we saw in Torino, economic powers. If we look in Liverpool, there's the Albert Dock. That was in 1988. Liverpool had lost 40,000 jobs. They were the busiest port in the world at one time. In the 1980s, they lost 40,000 jobs. And they renovated and restored the Albert Dock and repurposed it. In 2003, Liverpool was named the European Capital of Culture for 2008. And you here in Europe know how important that is to be designated that. And the year-long festival attracted 10 million visitors to the city that had never been in Liverpool before, for a 900 million euro economic benefit to the city. But once again, and most importantly, it raised the self-esteem of people in Liverpool, that people loved that city. There was, it's not just the Beatles, there was the Albert Dock, there were a lot of things that people loved about the city. So raising the self-esteem of these post-industrial cities was very important. Invest in education. We heard a little bit about this earlier today from some of the other speakers, but I'll come back to that in a minute. Another place that celebrated its heritage, if you remember Hurricane Katrina, New Orleans was a center of oil production, not just fun and games 24 hours a day. They lost a lot of oil jobs, and they were a victim in the 1980s. They have now brought the Mardi Gras back, the African American Indian tribes, music on the streets, and the very famous Jazz and Heritage Festival that's held every year. That was their celebration, and people have come back. So I mentioned investment in education. An educated workforce is essential to being in this maker economy, to the health of a city. The cities in this study, and maybe cities you know, all suffered brain drain in the 1980s when those jobs left. It wasn't just the blue-collar jobs. People in white-collar jobs were leaving as well. Engineers, architects, accountants, lawyers. It was a drain of intellectual property. So rebuilding and refreshing that intellectual base was very important. The rural region, which was down and out in the 1980s, had no universities. None. In the 1980s, they built 3 universities, technical universities. That was their investment in education. I feel that cities that do not invest in education and do not have a good university basis and job training are going to be left behind. German apprentices. I wish we had this in the United States. The apprenticeship program in Germany, some of you know about, it's a balanced curriculum of on-the-job training and schoolwork. And when a student can elect at age 15 to go that route rather than the university track. It's a very well-respected thing. Trained skilled workers and machinists are highly valued in Germany. It's not like a second-class thing. And so what happens is that they spend part of their time at a company, as you see here, maybe learning how to read blueprints or wherever it might be, and they spend part of their time at school getting general subjects and maybe some more technical education. And they're paid by the companies where the apprenticeship is. And at the end of the day, that's why German manufacturing is so productive, because they've started a track. In Pittsburgh, we've created something called the Makerspace Academy. And the idea here is to teach children to not be afraid of using laser cutters, 3D printers, or robots. And they can obviously start having fun around it, but eventually they're learning a skill. And Google, just while I was on the plane, I was reading the paper. Google has given the Children's Museum in Pittsburgh $1 million to create maker spaces in the public schools in Pittsburgh. So we're investing in the youth and in terms of technology. And lastly, I'm going to finish up here with good planning and urban design matter, which isn't surprising, so I'm an architect and an urban designer. Redevelopment mistakes were made after World War II all over Europe and the United States. The intentions of the leaders and the planners were good, but a lot of the designs were very, very bad. Let's take a look at Rotterdam. On the left, you can see what was left after World War II. A beautiful Renaissance medieval town was destroyed. In its place, the planners at the time put in these office towers and office blocks, very bland, with very little public amenities, public space, or retail. In the US, we did it not with bombs, but with something called urban renewal, in which 30 or 40 acres of a neighborhood would be torn down, and in its place would be, again, bland and modernism. We've been recovering for many years since then. But we know what works, what people want, what they gravitate to. Here are pictures from you-know-what city, Barcelona. See those great hams there? I was here 2 years ago on business, and I did some photographic surveying of myself. I'm saying, what a great, livable city this is. And cities like Barcelona and Paris are dense, they're mixed use, they're transit friendly, and within walking distance you have jobs, recreation, shopping, recreation, parks, and above all, cities like Barcelona and Paris are designed at personal scale, at the human scale. That's why people come here, millions of people from all over the world, to experience the scale of a city like Barcelona. I think we can remake these cities and new cities again in that mode. The 10 case studies in my study, I think, are very encouraging. In my view, these post-industrial cities are uniquely poised to succeed in the third industrial revolution. Remember their strengths: the downtowns, the universities, the parks, the vacant land, and remember the 4 T's of Richard Florida. All these cities are striving to have these 4 T's existing in their city. Post-industrial cities are creative cities. In my view, they will be successful because they've been working at it from the ground up, and they have that natural advantage of the good things that were already there and produced by generations before. And I'm happy to report that the third industrial revolution and the maker economy are alive and well in Pittsburgh, my hometown.